Hello and welcome to my FlossTube channel. I'm Jean Farish and I am so glad that you're here with me today. First of all, I want to thank you for kind of bearing with me last week. I had some minor dental surgery that left me a little more swollen and bruised than I expected, and so I put together kind of snippets of reruns of past episodes, and I am thankful that you enjoyed them as much as you did. So back this week, and I want to start with following up on my travel tips from a couple of weeks ago. Got some really good comments and suggestions from a number of people. So lots of people mentioned to me that they use a lanyard type system for traveling with their scissors and other small implements. And interestingly, my daughter Elizabeth, who's a pretty smart cookie, had figured out how to take the lanyard that we give out on our cruises, and she attached both her scissors and her needle threader to that. And this type has an extender thing, which really makes it convenient for tools like that. So to share a close-up, she has used the little tab thing that usually attaches your name tag, or in the case of a cruise ship, your key to your cabin, and she's used that to attach that to her scissors, and as well as attached her needle threader. And like I say, this type has an extender on it, which makes it really nice and convenient. And as a couple of people pointed out, when you use a system like this, then you're less likely to leave your scissors on the plane or to have them fall out of reach when you least expect it. So that's one good system. And the other one, I will show off the handiwork of one of my sisters. My sister Susan made this many years ago. As you can tell, it's a gorgeous macrame piece that she then attached a pair of folding scissors. This was her prototype, and I think that since then she has gone on to attach the macrame to something like a jump ring, so that if something would happen that the scissors would become unusable, that it would be easy to attach something else to it. So this is just a gorgeous piece of macrame that we have enjoyed in our family. So that's two ideas of how to manage your scissors and other small implements when you're traveling. Now, kind of on a different angle, a couple people suggested that they bring nail clippers. In fact, a couple of people specified, so they bring the nail clippers that are used for clipping a baby's fingernails because they're so tiny. And although I think that is a good way to cut your threads, for me, it's not going to get close enough to my actual stitching with the way that I like to cut my threads. And so, you know, it's a good compromise. But when I got to my destination, I would need to get out my good scissors and clip those threads closer so that there are no straggling tails anywhere. A couple people also talked about a disc-like razor. Basically, it's a round razor that's encased in something that's like a medallion that you wear around your neck, and in several places the cutting edge is exposed, and so that makes a good cutter. I will say that if you can get away with it, I'm not here to judge or reprimand, but I will say that for TSA regulations, they are expressly forbidden. So do be aware that they can be confiscated. And there are, I think, other alternatives that will work. That said, one of the, I think, most important things that I heard from several international travelers, either people who live abroad or people who travel frequently abroad, who made the point that TSA regulations are American laws. And so unfortunately, what happens all too frequently is an American will leave a U.S. airport following the TSA guidelines with no problem with their sewing implements. They get to their destination abroad. When they fly home, you're, of course, flying from an international airport. TSA regulations do not apply, and you need to follow whatever that nation's laws are. And so sometimes the very scissors that were okay on the first leg of your journey are not okay on the return home. So do be aware of that. A couple of people also expressed surprise that so many people enjoy stitching on an airplane because they found that the lighting was too subdued. Now, of course, I think a lot of that depends on the time of day that you're flying or where you're flying. There are many airlines that at night will lower all the cabin lighting, and no matter how much you want your individual overhead light to be on, it's not possible. So do be aware of that. Now, of course, there are a lot of good little book lights that will give you the sort of intense and very personal light that you need to stitch. A couple of people expressed surprise that there was such a passion about stitching while you travel, and made comments along the line that between the dim lighting in a cabin and the confinement, that they would not find very much enjoyment with what they're doing. Now, of course, that's a personal decision. And I guess the bottom line of my message a couple of weeks ago, and I will repeat here, is besides enhancing your own relaxation and enjoyment of your trip, particularly by air, also have regard for your fellow passengers as far as not infringing on their space or their comfort or their enjoyment. One of the notes that I got from one of the international travelers, a viewer by the name of Emily, had kind of a footnote for me saying that when I traveled to Southeast Asia in 2022, that she hoped that I would get to enjoy the amazing batik that is so readily available in the area. And I responded with an enthusiastic, absolutely, I'm already doing some research into that. Now, what she's talking about is the cruise that I'm planning to take in 2022, February of 2022, that will start in Hong Kong and has ports of call in Vietnam and Thailand, and then we end in Singapore. Now, this is a cruise that's being organized by the guys at RGE Travels. I get to come along as the guest teacher and of course, helping them to promote my classes and how the cruise is going to relate to textiles in the various places that we'll be visiting. So rather than getting details from me about the cruise, I'm going to direct you to Ray at RGE Travels, and I'm putting his email address on the screen so that you will have it. If you write to him, he will be happy to give you the details. We already have people that are signing up for this cruise. There are still plenty of vacancies, and this is going to be a cruise, I think, that will appeal to a wide range of people. I think that you would be comfortable coming by yourself, but also feel free to bring a spouse or a non-stitching friend, mother, cousin, daughter, next-door neighbor, the people that you enjoy traveling with. As much as I am looking forward to sharing my stitching expertise with the people on the cruise, and for myself exploring the fabulous textiles in the various places that we're going to be visiting, this cruise will also have a military emphasis. The organizers are dubbing this the Healing Warrior Wounds Cruise, and we will be honoring the wounded warrior CPO Kenton Stacy, who is from the U.S. Navy. And the information that Ray sends you will tell you more about this amazing young man. It will also, another person on the cruise with that military connection is U.S. Air Force retired Colonel Roland Guidry, and he will be returning to Vietnam after serving there during his military career. During our sea days, I'll be teaching some needlework classes. Colonel Guidry will also be offering lectures on military subjects. So I'm looking forward to attending those as well. Now, we're at sea for 5 days, so that's the longest that I will have been at sea on any cruise. So I'm really looking forward to those days when it's not so much about the hustle and bustle of getting to the various ports and exploring them, as it will be enjoying each other's company and learning something either about stitching or about the military or both. So I hope that you'll join me. And again, the best way to get information is to contact Ray. And then we've had just some general questions and comments. And one of them is one of the most common ones that we get. And this one came from MJ. And she asked about the meaning of ORT, O-R-T. And of course, to stitchers, we know what we're talking about when we say ORTs. And that is just those little snippets of thread that are left over when we're done stitching. Now, ORT is a word. They are not initials. It's not an acronym. They're not initials standing for 3 other words. There's a lot of kind of urban myths about that. But the word ORT is actually an archaic word that refers to a morsel of food or a tiny little bit of food that's left over after a meal. Now, again, because it's archaic, keep in mind that, you know, there was a time when people didn't have leftovers like we do. When a meal was over, anything that was edible was consumed or certainly put aside for another meal or another use. So anything that would have been described as an ORT indeed would have been a teeny tiny morsel. And again, the way we use that in terms of our stitching, when you're done stitching with a length of thread and you cut it off, if what remains is long enough to stitch something else with, it's not really an ORT. An ORT are those little tiny pieces that you're not going to use at all, that you end up discarding. And recently on Facebook, once again, the debate arose between the neat back or I don't care what the back of my work looks like. And these debates both amuse me and sort of distress me. And this one, I think, really kind of got under my skin because it veered off into the area where the claim is made that if you care about the way your back of your work looks, then you're diminishing the joy that you get from doing your needlework. And so my response to the group went along like this, and I'll just go ahead and read to you the comment that I left. From reading through the comments, I find that I have a very different perspective from most of the other commenters. First, you don't need to choose between having fun and taking care to stitch well. I do both every day. Next, having a neat back is not my goal. It is the result of following best practices. Third, when we let someone else influence us in such a way that we are robbed of enjoying our chosen leisure time activity, we're giving them way too much power. And finally, it's just as wrong to belittle someone for having a neat back as it is to belittle someone for not having a neat back. The golden rule applies here. So I know that my leaving this comment is not going to end the debate, and it will surface again in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, either on that same group or on another group. It's going to be an ongoing tug of war. And most of the time, I follow my own advice and I just scroll on by. But something about the comments that day, like I say, just really got under my skin. You can be kind and have a neat back. You can enjoy your work and have a neat back. You can do both of those things and not care what the back looks like. It's a personal choice, and I just kind of wish that everybody would get out of everybody else's business about this, as the kids tend to say. Now, if you are in whether it's a social situation or a class situation, and someone asks, how do you get your back so neat? By all means, share whatever tips that you have. and do it out of kindness and consideration, and helping that person get, I don't know, help that person achieve their own goals. If their goal is to neaten up their work, then you're helping them. You're not judging them. And that's okay. If they don't ask, let it go. Those of you who participated in my Facebook Live gatherings yesterday when we initiated stitching the Jane Hattersley sampler. Yesterday was April 9th, and so we started stitching Jane on that date, since that's the date that's on her sampler. At any rate, it was my first time hosting a Facebook Live, and boy, did I learn a couple of really big lessons. And I want to thank everybody for being so gracious and patient with me while I maneuvered or didn't maneuver how Facebook Live works. And that experience reminds me of the kind of questions that I get from new stitchers. This one wasn't necessarily directed at me. It was a comment, again, left on a community stitching bulletin board type thing, where the person asked this question. When you use the loop start, are you stitching with one strand or two? Perfectly good question, and not a surprising one coming from someone who's new. I'm sure the questions that rolled through my mind yesterday about Facebook Live, somebody with a great deal of experience would probably even wonder why I was wondering about them. But to me, when somebody is learning something that is a brand new field to them, no question is too silly or too simple. And so what I wanted to answer that question here, because other people may have that. It's a great question, actually. So what I suggest that this person do is make the distinction between how many strands there are threaded into the eye of your needle. So if you are taking that single strand and folding it in half and threading the two cut ends into the eye of your needle, at that point, you have taken the single strand and you're now stitching with two strands. So I love these kinds of questions from new stitchers. The folks that are doing the Roxie Stitch Along, the big news was that we added this gingham style strawberry and one done completely in the long arm cross stitch. So we continued working the border on the right and the left. We did not add anything more in the center, and continued working on our satin stitch. And so that was the big installment for Roxie for the month of April. Yeah, we're in April. And then next month we'll start working on the letters that are here in the center, and that will be a lesson on the eyelet stitch and the rice stitch. Now, lest you think it's too late, it's never too late to join a stitch along. This one is only available through my Etsy shop. It's only $15 for all 6 months, and each installment comes not just with the chart, but also with a very detailed video lesson that will help you with any of the aspects of that month's work that are new to you. So it's a great way, if you're interested in stitching on linen, to get started with that. I will also say that I created an Aida version. When you're stitching this particular sample on Aida, there are a couple of stitches that you really can't do on Aida, the satin stitch in particular, and so I've made accommodations. So I haven't left out the Aida stitchers if you're interested in that. So that's Roxie. And the other one is Jane Hattersley. And Jane officially got started yesterday, but of course, as you can see, I have a lot stitched on mine because I was stitching it before I decided to do a stitch along. So I left this whole area when I made the decision to do a group stitch along. I stopped stitching on this, and so this is what I have left to do, that I will be stitching along with everybody else who's doing it. And again, although this one officially started yesterday, it's not too late. This one, you can get the print version from a needlework store, or you can get the PDF from my Etsy store. And in the case of both Roxie and Jane Hattersley, of course, you can kit it out with things that you already have in your stash, or you can contact your favorite local needlework store and get the fabric and the floss of your choice. Oh, and by the way, Jane is completely cross-stitched, so it's very, very easy to do this one on Aida. And there are people that are stitching it on linen and even weave in Aida. Some people are stitching it over 2, some are stitching over 1, some are stitching with cotton floss, some are stitching with silk. So there's a wide range of possibilities for the Jane Hattersley sampler. And a final note for today, and I really want to start with a quote that I found just after a set of PMs with a guy named Steve. I found this when I was searching for a quote for my Great Park sampler. I'm maturing every day and righting my wrongs, slowly becoming a better version of me. And when I tell you about this exchange with Steve, you'll understand why that was sort of like opening a fortune cookie message just after you've made a massively big decision, saying something to the effect of, you know, have faith that you're making good decisions. So this is what happened. Let me also say that when this exchange was over, I asked Steve's permission to share it with you, which he granted. His first message to me was, been watching your FlossTube videos, learning a lot, even though I've cross-stitched and or needle pointed for 25 years. Yay, Steve. Caught you saying ladies in a video. There are lots of us guys who stitch too. So my response was, that's certainly true. Do you know how many years we ladies have listened to and read instructions geared to men? And even worse, have not been waited on in a lumber yard, not been listened to at an auto mechanics, been asked, when will your husband be here to look at a car at a dealership? It does take some getting used to, doesn't it? So that's the snarky answer. The gracious answer is, when I hear myself using feminine pronouns and chat as if I'm talking to a group of women, I ask myself if I'm being fair. I ask myself, am I being inclusive? I want to be fair and inclusive, so I will continue to give this some thought. But I want to be clear that I have been thoughtful about my choice of words. Obviously, so far, I've kind of figured that if the guys want to enter a woman's world, they will learn to cope, just as I did at the lumberyard. As I write this, I also ask myself, if I were teaching a class and Steve was in that class, would I exclude him? And the sincere answer is that I would not. There would be no snarkiness, no resentment based on decades of past treatment. I would treat you just as I would every other person in the class, with warmth and respect. I would take the high road. So Steve, you can look for a greater awareness going forward. Just bear with me while I stretch and grow a little. Thanks for your message. And then we exchanged a few other things, and Steve shared the fact that when he goes into a needlework store for the first time, one that's new to him, one that he will be new to the people who work there, he often receives a little inquisitiveness, wariness, as far as like, kind of like, why are you here? So I'm not the only one, I think, that needs to kind of broaden the way we look at stitching, not only to include as many people as possible, but to broaden our own horizons in terms of just the way we regard other people. So I'm really glad that Steve kind of called me out on that, and I will endeavor to do better about it. It's kind of a shame that in the English language we don't have a gender-neutral single pronoun. And I guess I've been paying attention to grammar for too long that I don't like using the word they or their, which are plural, when I'm talking about one person. And so that's one of the things I think that kind of makes it awkward, and maybe that's one of the things we'll change. just as the word ort is archaic, and yet we are using it today in a similar but not exactly the same meaning. Maybe there will be a new set of pronouns that are going to come about that will be more inclusive. So it's not just me striving to be a better version of myself every day, but I think as a society, we are doing that. And, you know, we have a ways to go, but we've also come a long way. And I think that we kind of need to pat ourselves on the back every once in a while, that we are growing and changing and improving as individuals, as a neighborhood, as a community, and we just keep, again, trying to be a better version of ourselves. So with that, I will say goodbye. I hope that in the coming week you will stitch happy, stay safe, and I'll see you next week.